Hey guys, Brian delivers you the goods here. I am returning to you finally, and I'm sorry I didn't do a review today on December 10th. I just was busy doing other things. I had to go run some errands today with my mom and all that, so I was really busy majority of the day. So I'm returning to you for a premiere video that is premiering on December 11th, which is for the Decent to Good Albums of 2022 official video. But this is part one of the Decent to Good albums because the list has 74 albums. And that's a lot of ground we gotta cover, or that I gotta cover in this end of the year video for you guys. So I'm gonna discuss from 74 to whatever number I get to for this first part. It's going to be a lengthy video, so just fair warning. You're in for quite an interesting video for sure. It's an end of the year video, so hopefully you'll enjoy it. So I'll let you know where I get to from 74 to whatever number, and let you know my thoughts on each album. So let's dive into this Decent to Good Albums of 2022 Part 1 video. Now, at number 74 is Years and Years with Nightcall. I have not really come back to this album. I didn't hate the lead singer's vocals, which you'll have to remind me in the comment section below his name again, because I kind of forgot. Like, this album was hit or miss for me, but other than that, it was decent. It's not the worst thing I've heard. The lead singer from the band Years and Years, he actually had a good voice, just some of the production in the album just felt alright. It was on the iffy side with me. But Consequences was a song I really enjoyed from this album. And Sooner or Later was pretty interesting. The only one I had a problem with was, sorry, there was something on my fucking laptop, so please forgive me on doing that for a moment. Something was on my laptop for a moment. Basically, at number 74 was Years and Years with Nightcall. There were other songs on here that I could appreciate, but other than that, there was one song on here that I was not a fan of, that I totally think is a rip-off from another song, and all that, in my personal opinion. So, yep. At number 73 is Shinedown with Planet Zero. Now, this album has weakened over time with me. I wouldn't say it's the best album of the year or a good album of the year. It's a decent listen. There are some problems with the album, with the lyricism, and some of the production on this album was pretty weak. There's a one lyric in the Dysfunctional You song, Suicide, Suicide, 1, 2, 3. Maybe these drugs are addicted to me. That lyric just is cringe right there. It's like, come on, Brent Smith, come up with something better than that kind of lyric. I know this is what they wanted to do, and I know this album's gotten a lot of good reception from other critics. I think the first three songs are pretty strong, and some other ones are pretty solid too. But America Burning has the one part with the banjo thing that I'm not feeling for, the hip, 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 hooray, they say, lyric. It's just like, I don't know. But overall, in my opinion, I think Shinedown Planet Zero has had some wonky moments in the album. And Sure As Fun was my least favorite song from this album. So I'm not really impressed with Shinedown Planet Zero, as I should be. But it would have made it at a lower list, but I put it at the top of the list. So at number 73 is Shinedown with Planet Zero. Alright, at number 72 is Carrie Underwood with Denim and Rhinestones. Now, I have not really returned to this album since it came out, but the title track alone just proves that it's pop country kind of sound. It's like, it's hit or miss for me. But every other song on here is alright to hit or miss for me, meaning it could be iffy with me, in my personal opinion, but for what it is, I think it's fine. It's a decent listen. It's not the worst thing I've heard. So at number 72 is Carrie Underwood with Denim and Rhinestones. There was one song, um, I think it was called Ghost Story, if I remember correctly. That one I kind of did like, but everything else has had its iffy moments with the rest of the album. It just fell a little bit flat with me, but did perform decently. It wasn't the worst album, but it's on this decent to good albums list, so, but at the top of the list. Number 71 is Gray Days with the Phoenix. Now, this album, I think they're really pushing it with the grave robbing from Chester Bennington. I don't want to say it in a mean way because I like Gray Days, but I think they should have stopped at Amends. That should have been the only dedication album to him. The Phoenix wasn't barely. It had Chester Bennington's vocals in the background majority of the time, and it wasn't sounding very good production wise with his vocals. I think they were playing with his vocals a little too much in this song, and I was not feeling for it. It just didn't work, and some of Chester's vocal pitches with how it was mixed in this album really was a little bit poor. But other than that, I think it was a decent listen. It's not my favorite album of the year, but it made it at the top of the list. So at number 71, it's Gray Days with the Phoenix. There was a song called Starting to Fly, which I kind of did enjoy. That was probably the only song I liked from that album, but other than that, the rest of the album kind of went, eh, it performed decently. But I didn't appreciate them dedicating it again to Chester, but I think they should stop where they're at, in my opinion. At number 70 is Becky G with Esquemas. I was not that I wouldn't say not that impressed with this album. I was sort of impressed with this album because it was a Spanish album, of course, but I did like the melodies coming from Becky G, and some of her vocals in it were sounding pretty strong. So I wasn't really hating this album that much. I think it's a decent listen. It's better than the Grey Days album. And I know I should have put it at a lower list, or at least like in the okay to man list last week or last weekend when I did it, but I just didn't want to. But because it was decent, it wasn't the worst thing I've heard this year. But Becky G, SK Moss kind of impressed me with certain songs. So at number 70 is Becky G with SK Moss. I can't remember every song from the album, so it's been a bit since I've listened to it, since like I think May. I think it came out May 13th, if I remember correctly, but I remember enjoying majority of it, but did have a decent outro to the ending, and some of the second half was slightly decent. And number 69 is Snoop Dogg with BODR. Now, this one was pretty interesting rap and hip hop album. Really like Snoop Dogg's rapping in it majority of the time, but there are some weak moments in the album with some of the production and the mixing. But still, he did a decent job on this album. So at number 69 is Snoop Dogg with BODR. I think he had certain songs on the album I wasn't sure if I was connecting with, but it was a pretty lengthy album. It was like, I think 16 to 18 songs in the album. I can't remember for sure. I have to go back and listen to this album again because I know it came out back in February this year. So that's an album I will decide to listen to again. Number 68 is Five Finger Death Punch with Afterlife. Now, I was a little bit impressed with this album. This was decent. It wasn't great in any way, because Gold Gutter, it has some cringy lyrics, but I think performance-wise, it was fine. Ivan Moody kind of toned it down a bit with his rantish screams, and he made a song about his critics, the people hating on him, the people disowning him, and all that stuff, and his sobriety in the Gold Gutter song. But Afterlife was a pretty interesting song. Times Like These did have some iffy, wonky lyrics, but I think it worked. Uh, what was that song? Um, there was I can't remember that song name. Judgment Day. That's one of them I can remember. Pick Up Behind You was the song name I was thinking of. Roll Them Bones was a little cringy, but did perform decently in my opinion. I was trying to think of majority of the songs. Welcome to the Circus had a pretty interesting intro to the album. It was weird, but it did perform decently, or at least solidly, in my opinion. Afterlife being one of my favorite songs of 2022. One of them, at least. Not the best song, but something. So at number 68 is Five Finger Death Punch with Afterlife. I think Judgment Day was the worst song on the album, but other than that, the rest of the album performed decently. So I was a little impressed with Five Finger Death Punch this time around. In my opinion, it did decently, but that's just me, I guess. Number 67 is Set It Off with Elsewhere. Now, this was a decent album. I haven't really returned to it too much, but um, there were some songs like Projector that I wasn't sure if I was feeling for, but there were other songs on here that were pretty decent, and Better Than This was a pretty good outro, in my opinion, the final song on the album. But Peekaboo was okay, but kind of cringy, in my opinion. I think it does alright with how his, I can't remember his name. To be honest, Cody Carson, I think is his name, if I remember correctly. Cody's vocals in it were pretty solid, but did have some weird production in that song, Peekaboo. It was just like, ugh, cringy with the peekaboo kind of thing. It was just like, what the fuck? So at number 67 is Set It Off with Elsewhere. Number 66 is Taylor Swift with Midnights. Now, I haven't really returned to this album, in my honest opinion. There were some songs I did slightly enjoy, but not something I would listen to off and on. It's a decent listen, but not anything's amazing in her discography. So, was a little bummed out with this album, but still, it made it in the top 60, of course, in the upper 60 numbers of this decent to good albums of 2022. So, number 66 is Taylor Swift with Midnights. I can't remember all the songs, but I remember thinking, yeah, it was a decent album, in my personal opinion. But some of the production and mixing for certain songs in the album kind of dragged on a bit, and some of the songs were a little slightly tad bit boring. But other than that, it performed decently. At number 65 is Lizzo with Special. Girls was probably the weakest song on this album, but About Damn Time actually had some humor to the song, and it was pretty catchy for what it went for. And Lizzo performed pretty solidly in this. Um, there was a song called Everybody's Gay in this song, and I'm like, well, it's pretty catchy. So I wasn't that disappointed with the song, but the title itself can come off as a kind of cringe vibe. Like you're like hesitant on wanting to listen to it. Like, really, that's what the title of the song is called? So it throws off a hesitation for some listeners. You become hesitant to hearing that title. So at number 65 is Lizzo with Special. It was a 13 track album, but it performed alright. Number 64 is Alicia Keys with Santa Baby. Wasn't a fan of Santa Baby, but it was something at least. It wasn't the best song I've heard in this album. It was a little weak in my opinion, but it did have some good vocals from certain times in the song. But other than that, the rest of the album kind of was decent, but nothing special. So at number 64 is Alicia Keys with Santa Baby. Number 63 is Diplo with his self-titled album called Diplo. Um, this one came out back in early March this year, and I was a little bit impressed with this, but I think it's decent. It's not the worst thing I've heard this year, but it's something at least. So definitely recommend checking it out for yourself to see what you think of it. I personally think it's decent. Don't Forget My Love being the best song on here. I think there was another one called High Times or whatever it was called. I can't remember. It's the second song on the album. It's like a 14-track album if I remember correctly. But I did slightly enjoy it for the most part. It's decent, but not anything I'd return to too much. So at number 63 is Diplo with Diplo. Number 62, this might have to be the last one I mention. It's Saxon with Carpe Diem. Now this one is a pretty decent album. Not really sure if I would return to this album in my honest opinion, but some of the drum work and guitar work kind of impressed me with this album. But the way the lead singer was singing, I just wasn't feeling for the album. So at number 62 is Saxon with Carpe Diem. Number 61 is Nova Twins with Supernova. After this, I will be ending this video, of course. So, yeah, I was a little impressed with Nova Twins Supernova. It made it at the lowest spot in the 60 numbers of this list. And I was a little impressed with it, but I still think it's a little decent, in my opinion. At least it's close to the lowest spot that I could get it at. So at number 61 is Nova Twins with Supernova. I'm going to have to return to you for part 2 of the decent to good albums of 2022 video, and that will be coming out a little bit sometime tonight, close to midnight, I guess you could say. It'll actually have a premiere for like 1 or 2 a.m. or something like that. This video will have a premiere at midnight for sure, so definitely tune into this premiere video. So with that being said, hope you enjoyed this decent to good albums of 2022 part 1 video. I did the best I could to make it as good as possible. I'll have part 2 coming out. I'll start recording it after I get this uploaded and test it out and see if it works and all that. The whole video as well. But as always, I will see you in my next review.